Okay, so before you actually watch this video, you need to make sure that you've watched the first one in which we read through the extract. Otherwise, you're not going to have a great deal of understanding what I'm talking about. Even if you have read the extract in your own time, you still need to know the historical context of that article in order for you to get the most out of this video. So please make sure that you have watched the first video first. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to go through the extract paragraph by paragraph, picking out some key points of summary for our comprehension skills, and also going through the stylistic elements and modes of persuasion. So we're going to start off then by looking at the first paragraph. So let me get it back up. So he says, "Since I am a preacher by calling," straight away you're thinking, okay, what mode of persuasion is he using there? So if we can go back to some of our class notes, let me just remind you of this. Modes of persuasion. So you've got logos, which is an appeal to logic, pathos, which is an appeal to emotion, and ethos, which is an appeal to ethics, often related to character or credibility of the persuader. So which one of these modes of persuasion is he using? I'll give you a second to think about it. So in my mind, that there is an appeal to ethos. It's an appeal to ethos for two reasons. So firstly, this here is asserting to us his credibility. So he's a preacher, he is a man of morals, so it's telling us a little bit about our speaker. So the credibility of our writer, he is a preacher, and therefore he is well versed to give us moral advice. It's also an appeal to ethos because it's clearly emphasising to us that Martin Luther King, he knows the difference between right and wrong. We as a reader are immediately thinking this is a man who can tell us exactly what we should think and feel, because he is on the side of God. You've got to think as well, especially to an American audience who are very, very Christian, that really would have been a big selling point to them, perhaps less so to us. Next. Major reasons for bringing Vietnam into the field of my moral vision. There he is clearly setting out why he is talking to us about this. It's all about his morals, it's all about morality, it's all about this vision that he's got for the world, this vision where everything is fair and equal. At least at the outset, a very obvious and almost facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America. When he's talking here about struggle, he's referring to that struggle for equal rights between African Americans, for African Americans. So he's relating that struggle to his own personal struggle. That there, you could argue, might be an appeal to ethos, to pathos rather. Where are we? Struggle. You could argue that's an appeal to pathos. In terms of that word struggle, which we can say has connotations of difficulty, pain, suffering. It's an emotive word, or you could say emotive language, and it's also an allusion to the historical struggle of African Americans. Instantly, if you were an African American reading this, and perhaps you didn't have very strong feelings about the war, very strong feelings about poverty, perhaps you're a very well-off African American, that there is giving you something to relate to, that there is giving you a reason why you should care, why you should believe him, why you should agree with him. And to us, looking back on it, reading it now, that also would be quite emotive, particularly to a Western reader, to think of something that is now seen as being so obviously wrong, you know, the injustice of the treatment of African Americans in the 1960s in comparison to what Martin Luther King is talking about, which is the Vietnam War, the struggles of the poor, etc. And then he goes on to say that there was a shining moment a few years ago in that struggle. So, shining moment. Now we know that we're going to hear about something good. But the word moment is giving away to us that it only lasted for a short time. It wasn't something that actually managed to affect any real change. It seemed as if there were a real promise of hope for the poor, both black and white, through the poverty program. See here this positive language that is coming out to us. You've got shining, you have got promise, you have got hope. So that creates that semantic field of positivity. He's using these positive words when he's talking about this one chance, this one opportunity that he saw to make the world a better place, and that was through the poverty program. Poverty relates to people who are poor. It essentially means it was a program there trying to help people get out of poverty, both black people and white people. There were experiments, hopes, new beginnings. Again, all this positive language. There we can see the language device of triples, or list of three if you will. Also again, a semantic field of positivity. You could probably think of something better than that, but just general positive language, that positive diction that we're seeing. So you've got this positivity all here, which I'm highlighting, and then that is very sharply juxtaposed with what comes after it. Remember, juxtaposition is that contrast of two opposite ideas. So you've got the positivity, the hope, versus now the struggle, the reality. So this here is the reality. Then came the build-up in Vietnam, and I watched this program broken and eviscerated. This program, that means the poverty program, was destroyed. It just became a very low priority, and people no longer were paying interest in that. It was as if some idle political plaything of a society gone mad on war, and I knew America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor so long as adventures like Vietnam continue to draw men and skills and money like some demonic destructive suction tube. Wow, where to begin with this sentence? There are just so many stylistic elements that we could talk about here. I'm going to pick out just a few. So the one that really stands out to me is this bit here. So the program is just some plaything of a society gone mad on war. So you could argue here that this is a metaphor, because society has not literally gone mad on war. He's comparing society to going mad to talk about this hysteria and how people didn't care about anything else. So you could argue that's a metaphor. He's also being quite hyperbolic with his language. Mad on war, it is quite extreme language that he's using. This here is obviously an appeal to pathos. Down here you have got a really sick, I think sick is the only word for it, and I don't mean that in the slang way. It's quite an interesting use of simile. So like some demonic destructive suction tube. So we know that it is a simile because of this word like. He's comparing it to a demonic, destructive suction tube. So if something is demonic, let me show you. If something is demonic, it's very, very evil. Here are some of the images that we would get for demons. Not all of them entirely appropriate, but there you go. You've got demonic. And a suction tube. I'm not sure if you would have learnt this word in English. I can't think why you ever would have learnt this word in English. So let me get it up for you. That's too small. Still too small. I'm thinking of something from a film called Willy Wonka, no it's not. It's a film called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, in which one of the main characters is Willy Wonka. A very famous scene where one of the characters gets sucked up through a tube. Suction tube, sucking tube, things get sucked up through it. Kind of like when you go to the dentist and they put that thing in your mouth to suck out all your spit. That's a small suction tube, which I think is what we were just seeing. So let's go back to where we were. So you've definitely got this language of evil, and it's also quite extreme with this idea of a suction tube that might suggest the force and the power and the drive of this evil, of the government's priorities, drawing the money away from the poor and shoving it all into the war. And then he goes on to say that he was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and to attack it as such. This here is a really key quote. That would be one that I would note down, and definitely would be useful to quote later on in your optional essay, that war is an enemy of the poor. Again, war isn't actually an enemy of the poor, so it's a metaphor. But that's really highlighting to us that war can only do really bad things for people who are poor, and as he says up here, both black and white. So the issue of poverty and the issue of race in this text, they are interconnected. You can't separate the two from each other. And therefore, because war is an enemy of the poor and Martin Luther King is very much in favour of all things equal, he has decided to attack it as such. So his key argument now is against the war, and we can see that specifically he is talking about the Vietnam War. So let me sum that up. I don't like how it always gives my comments over here in this corner where my face is, so let's try it over here. So Martin Luther King states that he will argue against war in all forms as it inevitably leads to inequalities for people in poverty, both black and white. Here, black people of all colours are interconnected in the struggle they face due to the war. And I've just realised that I'm doing British spellings, but you're going to see the SATs, so I'm going to delete my U. I will still maintain, however, that British spellings are correct. Americans are speaking English, they are not speaking American, so our spellings are correct. However, you are going to sit the SATs and you're going to go to American universities, so I will play nice and change my spellings for you. Okay, we're just going to pause there.